So the recording is just started. Your recording is just started, Matt.
Okay, all right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the blind blogger, Maxwell Ivy, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Accessibility Advantage, where I am going to be advocating for more accessibility for people with disabilities by emphasizing the many positive benefits of inclusion. And you can find the podcast at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. I do hope you'll visit the website. And even though there's some sad news over at blueberry.com, I hope y'all will visit the fine people there that provide the hosting for the podcast. So today I'm honored and even a little in awe. I'm going to be speaking with Mike Paciello. He is the Chief Accessibility Officer for Audio Eye Incorporated. He is the founder of the Paciello Group, the author of Accessibility for People with Disability, and he is an international leader in the field of accessibility and usability. And for those of y'all who don't know him, y'all should Google him because he's been doing this for like 40, 50 years, and he is a true icon and hero of our world. So, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Max. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I think it's 40 years, just to try to keep some context. 50 years puts me over the century mark, I feel like, anyway. But yeah.
Right, right. So, I just realized that I messed up there. I was supposed to do an audio description and give you the opportunity to do one as well, but let's save that till the end and go ahead and get started because I think your response there is a great lead in to sharing your background, letting people know, how much of a part you've been of improving accessibility for people with disabilities and let them understand why they should really listen today.
Yeah, so this has been my professional career my entire life. I started out, I did a little bit of technical writing in the very early years, back in the early 80s, but I very quickly transitioned into the field of accessibility. And quite frankly, I got involved because I was approached by a manager who had a project that involved us taking computer documentation for the company that I worked for back then, and bringing it to the National Braille Press in Boston. That really kind of led to a career of understanding and learning how to develop Braille, how to do it electronically and make it accessible documentation for the blind, which led to markup languages, which led to developing text or content and information on various media types. Like back then, we had CDs and then DVDs. Eventually, led to a role and involvement in the creation of the Web Accessibility Initiative for the W3C. Did that in the late '90s. Launched my one of my companies. I've had three or four now, but the one that most people know about is TPG, or TPGI as they're now known, at Vispero. Pulled together what I felt at the time was perhaps the best group of the world's leading experts in web and software accessibility and usability. We went on for, well, I stayed there for about 16 or 17 years before I sold TPG to Vispero. They've been off and running now for the last 7 or 8 years without me. I've since I've tried retiring a couple times. That didn't take. Um, and I keep getting called back in the field. Did a little work with Pearson for a while, and got involved in doing some work and some activity there in education and accessibility. And then eventually I got involved with Audio Eye. Most of that was a result of some of the challenges that the industry was experiencing as it related to overlays. There's 40 years.
And you are a really good guest and a really good ambassador for audioeye.com. It's audioeye.com because I didn't even have to ask you my next question about to explain what overlays and overlay widgets are, what they're capable of, and what they're not capable of.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, and there's a little history there because rightfully so, there was a lot of concern right out of the box when companies were starting to make um, Well, they were starting to make brags and whatnot about the capabilities of what they thought an overlay can do for the audience and for the folks that are out there, especially our friends and colleagues that are blind or have any kind of a visual disability. An overlay or an overlay widget. Sometimes you'll hear that terminology. It's kind of like a little toolbar. They actually go back in accessibility quite a long time. I remember the first time I saw them was a little bar that a couple of banking systems. I worked with Digital Credit Union back in the 90s, and they would put this little widget on the screen, and all it did was increase and decrease the size of the text. So that gives you an idea of what an overlay is supposed to do in terms of accessibility. It is a tool that usually sees some sort of visual. They were at first not really accessible to screen readers. They have been now. You can detect them with your screen reader on screen. That opens up basically a menu of settings that are very similar, if not almost completely analogous, to the kind of settings that already exist in browsers. And many of them exist across operating systems like Apple and Microsoft have them in their OSs. So they do things like screen contrast adjustments, font adjustments, little things like that, user interface type um, adjustments that a user can do. The problem with them, quite frankly, is they get oversold in terms of what they actually can do and how accurately they can perform the kind of user interface or website accessibility, um, you know, things that they can do to enhance them for the user. More importantly, from my perspective, they do two things incorrectly. One is they don't correct the source, and that's been a big, big challenge and a big concern of those of us that have been in the accessibility field and the experts in the field. So you're really not changing what needs to be enhanced in a website to make it accessible to a blind or other user with a disability. You're just kind of putting a band-aid on it for a little while. It's a temporary fix that only works in the session that you happen to be involved in. The other problem with them is, frankly speaking, they're redundant in many different ways. They conflict with the features and the functionality of existing assistive technologies that are used by various people with disabilities, and so they conflict at that level.
Okay, some very important information there because, as you wrote in a great blog post for Audio Eye, part of our problem with the discussion around automation in general and overlays specifically is that not everybody is using the same definitions for the term. So I really appreciate you getting that out there. Now, before I ask my next question, I'm going to turn my screen reader off because I'm hearing some notifications I can't control that are hitting my audio, and I don't want that to happen to you. So
Yeah,
just
and
bear
Max, if you could give me 2 minutes, I just realized that my windows are open, noise is going to come out there, and there's actually someone at my door. So just give me a minute, and I'll be right back. Skip to content button.
Oh,
Item choose eight one item pause button pause. StreamYard Studio voiceover.
okay, so you talked a bit about overlays, and now I'd like you to talk a bit about more more of the kind of automation that y'all use at Audio Eye that you feel does have the ability to deliver more in the way of accessibility.
Yep, yeah, another great question. So automation again, especially in the age of AI, which AudioEye is quite heavily invested in, it creates an ability to scale. That is to enhance a web environment, especially large web implementations, faster. Not necessarily better just because they're auto remediated, but faster in terms of a lot of things that can more easily be corrected. So when we're talking about automation, uh, we have different types of remediation remediation here at AudioEye. We have complete automated remediation. Um, we have guided remediation. So what that is that's automation with some experts are kind of guiding along the remediation depending on the complexity of the problem that is occurring or that we're seeing in the web environment or it's been detected. Because remember, we're monitoring our client websites or their digital properties on a 24/7 basis. So anytime any new error or issue comes up, it's detected automatically, and then depending again on the kind of service that we're providing for a client, we're doing an automated fix, or enhancement. We're doing guided remediation, or in fact, we may have to do or recommend a manual remediation. So, a manual remediation is that we've got experts on staff, including individuals with disabilities like yourself, who are involved in the enhancement and the remediation, generally speaking, at source, if possible, for our clients. And then we also provide another service to users who don't want the automation, but they want to make the enhancements or fixes themselves, and they have the capacity and the ability to do that based on the technologies, these technologies that they're using, and how well they work and interface with with the browsers, for example, in a web environment. So that's basically how automation works. Again, depending on the complexity of the problem. So if the problem or if the issue is, say, something like a form label. So as a screen reader user, your screen reader, a JAWS, an NVDA, whatever you're using out, that you might be using at any particular time, VoiceOver, will announce the form, and then if the form has been properly coded, it should tell you what that form is about or what it's for. So say in a common, very simple scenario, a first name and a last name. So you have a form field that allows the user to implement their first name and then their last name. Well, those form fields and being able to identify them for a screen reader user particularly is critical. So if the form label is not there, the automation, AudioEye's automation, will detect that and then fix it. It will go in and correct it. It'll put in first name, last name. It goes around, basically searches contextually for what kind of information about that form is there, and then we detect it, we fix it, and we remediate it. Other problems are a lot more difficult. For example, and again, I'll give a simple example in terms of complexity. If you have an image on a screen, and that image has alternative text, well, we could detect whether or not, using automation, that alternative text exists or doesn't exist. But now, in order to correct it, we've got to have some sort of context to understand what we're going to put in the correct alternative text or a long description. So you can see how some of this can be done, using automation. More likely, especially as we get into more complex user interface objects, it will require either the guided or expert enhancements.
Right. So what we're talking about here is a collaborative approach with the technology of automation and AI, plus human evaluation and human remediation, to come up with a package that allows you to improve accessibility at scale, which is critical given how quickly the internet is continuing to expand, but at the same time allow you to provide real accessibility.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Okay, so to me, another important point here is the source of the automation. Because if somebody's trying to create an automated process, it's only as good as the information they have to work with. So if they're not working from input from a team of people with a variety of disabilities and a variety of skill levels, they're going to get this wrong either way, yes?
Without a doubt. And it's one of the reasons why AudioEye has integrated. As part of our team work, we have integrated users with disabilities who are expert in terms of the technologies and the assistive technologies that they use to ensure that any enhancements or remediation corrections that we make to the code or to that layer in between themselves and the actual source is done correctly and is usable as well as accessible. When I think about, I don't know about you, Max, but when I think about accessibility, I think about it being accessible in terms of the technology used by people with disabilities. So I have a screen reader, right? Or I've got a screen magnifier, for example, or because I can't use I can't use a mouse, I use a keyboard. So all the keyboard inputs. I see that as being accessibility. But because something is accessible, to the applications used by people with disabilities doesn't make the web or the interface that you're actually interacting with, say a storefront or a government service organization, or you're at a university and you're taking a course, it doesn't make it usable. And that's where things like navigation schemes and more along the lines of color contrast become so critical. For the deaf, making sure that the videos are properly captioned, for them. There's a lot more to this in terms of usability. The two do not work independently. You can't make something accessible and assume it will be usable. You can't make something usable and assume that it's accessible. The two have to. There's a marriage there, a strong marriage.
Yes, when I talk about it in my own conversations, I refer to it as a seesaw. So definitely that neither one of them will get the other by just by you going through the process. And I love that you talked about accessibility and usability, because when people don't understand the navigation limitations or parameters of adaptive technology, then they can meet the minimum accessibility requirements based on guidelines from the government or W3, but they can't necessarily create enjoyable, usable web content.
Exactly. Yep, that's it. That's why when I had the privilege of co-chairing the last Section 508 committee with my now deceased but a close friend and colleague Jim Tobias, one of the key themes that we brought right into was the notion of usability and user experience. That we had to create new standards that would ensure that things weren't just accessible, but they were usable.
Right. So that's a very important point. I would imagine that given how difficult it is to get people to buy into accessibility, getting them to go that next step to usability is probably often challenging.
Well, yeah, because more often than not, most companies, that are building web apps or web presence or digital properties and things like that, they don't have the two disciplines together. They don't have them working together. They don't think about it. I used to always talk about thinking accessibility, but the reality is they really don't think about user experience when it comes to people with disabilities. All they want, by and large, and we pretty much know this, is give me the quick fixes. Give me something I can check this off. I have it done. I meet the compliance requirements, that whatever the government or otherwise requires that I do, and then I'm done. Which is which is really why, frankly speaking, what AudioEye presents in terms of a platform and a technology is so valuable, because we understand how businesses have to meet the bottom line, and we understand how, on the other end, users need to interact with a digital property in an accessible and usable way. By putting the both of those together, making that part of our business, so to speak, then we can ensure our clients and their users, and frankly our friends and colleagues, people with disabilities, of a much more robust and usable and accessible experience.
Right. And earlier you referred to having a community of people with disabilities who work alongside your developers. And I just wanted to mention that over the 4 years since I have known about AudioEye, and participate, that I've done some of those site evaluations myself using my screen reader to familiarize myself with a new site and navigate through it and find the errors, and then recommend to the folks at AudioEye as to what I felt would be the best way to fix those issues to make it accessible and usable. And so it's a great model that y'all have, and it would be nice if more companies in this space would adopt it. But you're right; it's generally more get me to that checkbox so that I can stop worrying about this and focus on something else.
I think that's one of the great disservices, believe it or not, of compliance is that while it's there to mandate, organizations, whether they're public or private, it does it naturally puts you into the position of just getting what's done to meet the minimum requirements, right? And I think that's something that in our profession we work so hard to create compliance as a means for creating a stick-like effect on getting companies to do things that eventually, as it has, time will catch up and company is going to say, well, that doesn't really make a difference to me anymore. I don't really care about that. So we forgot to teach them how to care. Forgot to teach them about people and humans and human interaction, which is so crucial to the experience of people with disabilities in a digital society.
Right, and that's the purpose behind my podcast and the message that I try to share, which is that the accessibility has so many positive benefits for business owners if they would just come to understand the things that they're missing out on by focusing strictly on compliance and avoiding negative penalties, and then focus more on the competitive advantage even that they could have over some of their similar companies in the same industry simply by embracing accessibility beyond the minimal compliance.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't say better, Max.
Well, thank you. So, my last question is, I'd like to hear what you think the future looks like for accessibility, and where do you think we are headed as far as reaching the goals of a fully inclusive online world.
Yeah, sure. So let me just say out of the box, I think one of the things that we recognize at Audio Eye, and I think again, most of my colleagues and friends in the profession of accessibility and website accessibility and digital properties, we understand that there is a lot that still needs to be done in terms of just improving the tools and the platforms that we build today. And every day, everybody's working on it. So now you're seeing more of an integration or use of AI. I think we figured out that there is value there, that we're kind of taming a lion, so to speak, if you will, that we've got to be careful. We don't want to edge anyone out, but at the same time, and we have to make sure that the data that we're working with in terms of AI is accurate and it's properly focused in terms of the goals of how we're using it. Where I see things going, and my goal has been, and believe it or not, I wrote about this. My book is what, 25 years old now, I think, is this notion of personalization. So for years and years and years, anyone and everyone that I know of that is an individual with a disability, and actually, frankly, whether you have a disability or not, I guess in the long run doesn't matter, but more profoundly so for folks with disabilities, is they have technology as we know it that is adaptive, right? So it's incumbent or on the user to adapt or their their technology adapt to the interface in which they're interacting with, right? So you're using a screen reader, it makes all the, we know all the adjustments and enhancements that have had to be made between jaws and NVDA and voiceover, et cetera, and so forth. But you're required to adapt to the web. I want to flip that model. And I see us headed in that direction. I think AI and automation are big wins in that area, will give us that value. But I want to see just the opposite scenario happen. I want the user interface to know that I'm a blind user And because I'm a blind user, the interface that I'm interacting with, the store that I'm shopping at, the bank that I'm doing my financials with, the government service that I'm trying to get, whatever license or pay my taxes, those interfaces adapt to me. I don't need to make any adjustments. I don't need to worry about performance. I don't need to worry about the user experience because it does it for me in just the way that we interact with interfaces, that are, otherwise curb cuts in nature. They work for everybody.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about something similar to localization when you have websites that can adjust to language and culture on the fly, but instead talking about adjusting to a particular disability and adaptive technology option.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay. I just have one nagging follow up question that if I don't ask you, I'll probably kick myself later. So,
Sure.
to me, one of the real problems we have if we're trying to get to this localization model where it's going to identify I'm a person with disability and what technology I'm using is there is still the pervasive fear that if I am identified as having a disability, I will get less than equal treatment from a business owner or from a government agency. So, you have any ideas how we overcome that reluctance?
Yep, user controlled and permission based. That works. I've done a number of surveys. I've interacted with a number of colleagues and friends in the field with disabilities. If I give you my permission to do something like, for example, there are vital services that we need to interact with today that pretty much have gone almost completely digital, right? And you don't want to be blocked out. So you've got to have permission, user controlled, and then whatever privacy um, standards need to be around there so that your information about you isn't given away or sold or marketed or what have you. Um, there are a number of options that can be done. I work with other organizations where the second the interaction between you and their application or their website is ended, they destroy all the information. So I think things along those lines can be done, and users, consumers can have the assurance that they are not being taken advantage of or edged out otherwise.
Yeah. So this is why you get an expert and a leader in the field who's been at it for 40 years because he's already thought about these questions and thought about them over time and come up with some very interesting and well thought out solutions. So, Mike, I want to thank you very much for coming on the Accessibility Advantage. I appreciate you helping educate me and my audience more about what accessibility tools are available, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of, and what the future does hold for including more people with disabilities online. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Max, and thanks very much for having me on your show. I wish the best for you and all the friends that are listening.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, I've been speaking with Mike Paciello. He is the Chief Accessibility Officer at AudioEye, which you can find at audioeye.com, and that's EYE. He founded the Paciello Group. He is the author of Accessibility for People with Disability, and he is a recognized international voice in the field of accessibility and usability. And of course, this has been the Accessibility Advantage, which you can find at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today and that you'll join me again on the next episode. Thank you, and please take care of yourselves out there.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Stream item chooser menu. 161 items. 81 item pause button. Pause button. Stream.